Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to announce that Sums Consulting is working in partnership with Microsoft to help universities consider how digital technology is essential to transforming the student recruitment journey in a post-pandemic landscape. We'll be running a series of webinars exploring this theme, and today, in the first of our webinars, we'll be taking an overview of what's happening across the sector, and we'll be looking at our target audiences and finding out more about their expectations. It seems a long time ago, but at the beginning of this academic year, we were already talking about a perfect storm in higher education. The demographic nadir of 18-year-olds, increased competition for students at home and abroad, the new regulator, and the impact of Brexit, and so on. And coming into this year, 61% of our universities reported a financial deficit. This was already leading to efficiency measures across the sector. At Sums, we were working with some universities trying to make £20 million operating savings. And then COVID hit. If there wasn't already an impetus for getting more effective and more efficient, the pandemic has certainly provided one. But we've seen the sector respond positively. And at Sums, we're optimistic that the sector can take the opportunity to come out of the crisis in better shape. COVID has seen many universities at their best, helping to create a vaccine, supporting the NHS on the front line. Experts are back in fashion, and on campus, we've seen good planning by many and uncharacteristically swift decision-making. And much of that thinking and decision-making has recognised that universities are values-based organisations and will be judged on these decisions and how they affect the people that study with them, those they employ, and the wider communities that rely on them. How they've handled the crisis will be long remembered in their towns and cities. The pandemic has driven a digital revolution. Our friends at Microsoft estimate that we've had 2 years digital transformation in just 2 months. But the situation has also highlighted stark digital inequalities amongst both students and staff that exacerbate the socio-economic learning gap. And whilst universities have adapted as best they can, and we've seen great engagement, online open and applicant days, for instance, it has really brought home the reality that the digital world is there to support and enhance and not to replace. But in our discussions with senior leaders across the sector, along with our own observations of the challenges we're seeing and the better responses to it, we've identified 3 areas that offer major opportunities for change. The need to actually embrace the financial challenges to transform structures, systems and processes for good, avoiding the pitfalls of the usual salami slice approach to cutting equally. That simply masks the inherent inefficiencies. The sector has indulged itself in rapid estates expansion in recent years, and now is the time to capitalise on digital transformation opportunities to reshape physical spaces, creating smaller, higher quality, higher tech campuses, less reliant on the need for large lecture theatres, when actually, let's face it, passive content like lectures can better be consumed asynchronously online. And we've also seen that our finances are too reliant on a centuries-old academic calendar based on students needing to contribute on the farm. Take a less rigid approach to that academic calendar, creating multiple start dates to facilitate more flexible, customer-centric provision, and de-risk those business models. These are the trends that we see as being really important going forward. But we actually find ourselves starting off with a problem of size and shape. In essence, COVID presents sharp income challenges colliding with escalating operating costs. But let's look at those costs. Most universities, whatever their size, try to be self-sufficient. And this has resulted in large infrastructures for what are, in reality, relatively small institutions. Only 29 of our universities had more than 20,000 FTE students in 2018-19. But 64 of them had more than 2,000 staff, 39 had more than 3,000. And as HESA data returns show, more than half of our HEIs had more admin staff than academics. 22 have got ratios in excess of 60-40. Essentially, we have gotten fat in those good years of student recruitment growth. But all too much of that growth has been organic, and the administration has been allowed to expand more or less unfettered. It's taken sharp income challenges to really highlight this. Looking at those costs, you can see just how quickly they've escalated. The pale blue colour on this bar chart represents admin staffing costs. Look how fat that's become in just the last 4 financial years. But overall, that is a steep incline. It's not a consistent picture across the sector, though. Much of the admin costs have gone hand in hand with student number increases. Looking at this graph, those in the top left, they've already got an issue. They've got growing costs and falling student numbers. These are universities in trouble. Those in the top right-hand quadrant need to act now. If COVID ends up driving UK students to defer and international students not to come to the UK, then many of those universities could find themselves crossing that axis into serious financial challenges. So let's take a look at that student recruitment picture. UK HE operates in a global market. Our universities have been reliant on international student income increasingly over recent decades. And when we look at SUM's own member universities, some are reliant on international student fees for as much as 30% of their total income. Yes, that's being challenged by COVID, but we've already seen signs that the over-reliance on Chinese students in particular is not sustainable, well before COVID. COVID has thrown the old world order up in the air. China is pointing at Australia and calling it overtly racist as an environment for Chinese students. The US is struggling with its COVID response and flip-flopping over whether students learning 100% online have the right to be in the country. So whilst that's back to being a yes, it'll certainly be causing some uncertainty in the world leader for overseas students. And China itself, along with some other Asian nations, is starting to compete more seriously in the international student recruitment market itself. Indeed, the Chinese government is being increasingly overt in its positioning on this point. They've invested heavily in HE infrastructure. They've got rising stars in the international global league tables, and they're pitching to be a smart alternative choice for students from developing nations. So consider the impact of not just a reduction in Chinese students, but in those from South Asia and the ASEAN bloc as well. China operates at speed and at scale with vast investment resources. One of the biggest surprises to me at the beginning of the pandemic was learning more about Wuhan, a city larger than London that I'd never heard about, that was a village 20 years ago, but perhaps most importantly, is the largest student city in the world. Over 1 million students there. But if you compare the investment and innovation we've seen from China with what's happening in the US and to an extent the UK, it doesn't reflect well on the traditional HE strongholds. I'd like to point you towards this fascinating interview with Scott Galloway, the professor of marketing at NYU. He points out that in the States, tuition fees have risen 1,400% in the last 40 years for a product that essentially hasn't changed. Students graduate with $100,000 worth of debt when the operating margin for delivery by universities is up at nearly 90%. The financial challenges of COVID, that's not going to affect the top tier. They'll continue to thrive. The second tier will survive, but the lower ranked teaching and learning focused institutions will be in real peril. Galloway also predicts that HE offers a fertile ground for the big tech companies. They can bring digital innovation to help revolutionize the sector and drive down price points whilst maintaining margin. There's massive scope for UK HE in this space, but it may require radically different financial models than we're used to. So what are our immediate challenges? Well, the latest UCAS figures show an actually encouraging picture, but we do have to expect this to change. The longer social distancing restrictions and other measures remain in place, the more likely it is that we'll see deferrals. New first years will be reluctant to start their university lives, their university careers, with a second-rate experience, either in or out of the classroom. So be prepared for clearing to be brutal this year. You'll need to work harder than ever to reassure supposedly committed students. And be prepared to fight tooth and nail for every new prospect in the pool. Everyone will be reaching into their reserve lists, relaxing tariffs to maintain income. This won't just affect the lower ranked universities, but the less well prepared. Having good student journey technology helping your efforts in this space will make a massive difference. And that digital infrastructure is only going to be more important going forwards. The demographic trajectory points to an additional 50,000 students a year in the UK by 2030. Similarly, a major study by Howells on IQ points to an increase from 5 million to 7 million international students globally in that same time frame. So now is the time to make sure that your processes, systems, and your people are up to the challenge, are ready to meet the demands of Generation Z and Generation A. Their expectation levels are of a different order, as Nathalie will be sharing later. Act now so that your university is ready to take advantage of these coming opportunities. And that's just one of the ways that I want to encourage you to think boldly about the future. Universities need to act quickly and decisively, not just to save next year's finances, but to reshape their long-term financial future. Use this as an opportunity to make hard decisions about the type of university you are or want to be, realistically can be, about the programs that are no longer relevant or attractive, about services that are not needed, used or wanted anymore if they ever were in the first place, and about the areas that actually require investment, not cutting. Investment, for instance, in digitising the whole of that sales funnel, looking after the income, not just the expenditure side of things. Be self-critical. Are your people, processes and systems up to it? And be creative when it comes to solutions. In scaling up, universities could be self-sufficient. So if you're a university that's already in growth mode, why not think proactively about merger? Many back office functions make sense to share between neighbours. With more digital teaching and learning, look at reducing, reshaping physical space, possibly including sharing it with other anchor institutions in your places. And also consider setting up special purpose vehicles to deliver services at lower costs with staff on different terms and conditions. But that's enough about universities themselves. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Nathalie Mortimer, to tell you more about our future students and how we need to change today to meet their needs and expectations tomorrow. Nathalie.
Great, thanks, Joel. That was a really insightful summary. So as we've just heard, student numbers are expected to increase from here on in, and 2020, despite the current pandemic, is set to be a buoyant year from a home recruitment perspective, with 65% of applicants remaining fully committed to their firm choice. However, even before COVID, we were seeing changes in our demographic in terms of their expectations and engagement across the student journey. And as Data HE note, benefiting from this surge is not a right or an entitlement. Students during and post-surge may well feel they have fewer, less generous choices than their predecessors, but they will still have choice. Universities need to demonstrate your appeal. You will need to prepare for and ensure that your proposition overall speaks well to this age group. So I'm going to look at the consumer perspective now and why your audience is driving the need to transform your approach to recruitment. You will note that I just used the term consumer, and I appreciate we could have an entire webinar about the debate of students as consumers, but for the purposes of today, I am labelling them as such. There's a lot of insight available, but in my view, this boils down to 3 key points. Good customer experience requires a deep understanding of the consumer around the journeys they take, the generation they were born into, their individual motivations, interests, etc., and of course the impact of the recent global pandemic. Number 2, continual learning is a must. And number 3, what does this all mean for you? Student recruitment journeys are complex and hard to distill into a single visual interpretation. Whilst we know that there are a series of broad stages, awareness, attraction, application and so on, the journeys for each prospective student will vary depending on their personal situation, the course and mode of study for which they're applying, their support network around them, and at what stage in the cycle they are applying, and that's just to name a few variables. This boils down to the fact that prospective student journeys are far from linear. They are complex and multifaceted, and they don't fit the neat boxes that the sector often applies to them. For example, UG International, UG Home, distance learning, and so on. It's important to acknowledge this and take the time to understand the many different customer journeys that exist for your university, and then design your services and your offer to fit the needs of the consumer. We know that top-level generational insight is good to understand mass behavioural change and what's likely to impact the way we organise our services and the way we deliver our services and the way that we engage with our audience. As noted by the experts on generational cohorts, we define generations because when you are born does affect your attitudes, your perceptions, your values and your behaviours. This doesn't mean this is the only insight we need to keep abreast of, but it is important. Right now, we know it's all about the millennials and Gen Z, but Generation Alpha are not far behind. Born after 1997, Gen Z is the generation currently applying to university, and it's estimated they represent around 40% of all consumers currently. Growing up post 9/11, they are the world's first digital native generation and have very different attributes and expectations from millennials. The sector is starting to realise the need to adapt their services and experiences to attract and retain these students. Gen Z are the first generation not to differentiate between online and offline. They're very concerned with the value they perceive to gain from their experiences. Unidays recently found that in their Infinity Index, value came top. The main difference between Gen Z and millennials is personalisation over contextualisation and cause over convenience. Millennials are described as the me generation, Gen Z are described as the we generation, and 75% of their concerns they have are about other people. They care about the moments that matter. The big moments such as moving away from home, living on their own for the first time, opening a bank account, these moments matter, and they're looking for a personalised, humanised offer from their prospective universities. Gen Z demand a lot from their customer experiences. They want brands to inspire them, not just reflect them, and they want to feel like they can identify themselves in any advertising targeted at them. This is a level of sophistication that most UK universities are unable to offer due to limitations with current technology platforms and ways of working. So Gen Alpha, well, they're born in 2010 onwards and have been born into technology, and they are users of pervasive technology. Recently described as a tribe of tech-savvy environmental activists who are embracing traditional outdoor activities, Gen Alpha are characterised by their strong values, which will dictate who they buy from. The UK is on course to hit peak Gen Alpha in 2025, by which time there will be 2 billion of them around the globe. A recent report by Beano for Brands reveals that 86% of children under 10 are already using new technology to design, build and make things. However, digital hasn't won over outdoor pursuits just yet. They still enjoy life away from screens. So while they may be digital natives, their relationship with digital is not exclusive. Thoughtful and characterised by their strong values, most important to them is family and friends, followed by happiness, health and education. And 66% of them want to buy from companies who do good in the world. The social networks that this generation will engage with are unlikely to have been developed yet. The Gen Alpha familiarity with Amazon is something the rest of the world should be paying close attention to. With over half of kids talking to Alexa already, comfort with voice interaction is only going to get stronger. It's hard to predict how AI and Gen Alpha will interact when it comes to education, but it's likely they will benchmark their experience against the best experience they've had, regardless of industry. So at a top level, this is influencing their mindset, their behaviour and their attitudes, as well as how it may affect their engagement with you. It's therefore critical for universities that you adopt a strategic capability to design, build, test and adapt your customer experience journeys over time. So, as we just heard from Joel, COVID has had an impact, and the recent pandemic has had an impact on all generations, not least the younger generation. Recent reports from McCrindle and Howells show that almost half of Gen Z say COVID-19 has had an extreme or substantial impact on their life. They're feeling more anxious, frustrated, overwhelmed, confused and unprepared about the situation than any other generation. Being in their teens and early 20s, this life stage for Gen Z is normally characterised by education, study and socialising, and there is now a general sense of missing out. Year 12 students are feeling the pressure as they still have heavy workloads and feel they've had few allowances for a difficult situation. Year 13 students are feeling a lack of purpose and focus as a result of little or no workload, and there have been mixed reactions to the grade assessment process, with some feeling positive and others less so. The level of support students received from schools here in the UK has been hugely variable, which has had an impact, again, both positive and negative. Homeschooling has helped students discover some unexpected benefits of online distance learning, but also its limitations. 52% of those interviewed as part of the McCrindle research believe education will be delivered more online in the future, although the sentiment of many students is they're looking forward to getting back to the classroom. While Zoom helped connect some during the pandemic, many suffered from Zoom fatigue and they've missed interacting with their friends in person. 62% of students involved in the Howells research note they're more open to doing a few modules via digital or distance learning, but not their entire degree. There are mixed views about the university experience due to the current situation, although this doesn't seem to have had an impact significantly in terms of UCAS decisions to date. However, overall, the research highlights that prospective students remain largely in the dark, unable to plan their future without crucial information being available to them. And for Gen Alpha, a generation that was already impacted and shaped by technology, COVID-19 has further entrenched digital into their lives, while also highlighting the importance of the tactile. Gen Alpha will be familiar with using Zoom and engaging in a virtual world as a result of COVID-19. We may also see them pushing to use technology in more creative ways as a result. So lastly on COVID, a recent report by QS Insights has started to explore the impact on international student perceptions at subject level, which makes for interesting reading. Perhaps not surprisingly, given the cultural context, but business and engineering subjects are likely to be more impacted by a move to online over other subject areas such as medicine and dentistry. Okay, so we've heard that customer journeys are far from linear. Generational cohorts are important and COVID-19 has had far-reaching impacts on our emerging generations. But we also need to acknowledge that generational cohorts are only part of the picture, and we simply cannot rely on just that information to design our student journeys. While trends provide us with a valuable amalgamated view into the changing needs of demographic groups over time, insights gleaned from generational marketing research are precisely that, trends. It's therefore critical for you to study outliers that exist to the data and how representative those outliers are in your target audience base. For example, you will no doubt find Millennial and Gen Z consumers that prefer to receive physical communications rather than communicate via mobile or digital channels. If these outliers represent a significant portion of your customer base, generational marketing could be misleading to your overall strategy. One should therefore neither make sweeping generalisations or assumptions. We are all too familiar with the categorisation of students into large homogenous groups, such as UG International, UG Home, PGT and so on, when in fact personas are much more nuanced than this. And we shouldn't continue to segment at such a mass level. Often we appreciate this is the case due to constraints within a university's underlying technology infrastructure, but now is definitely the time to make the case for change if you're not already doing so. Providing an industry-leading customer experience requires marketeers to focus on the individual and provide a truly personalised experience, regardless of the channel being used to communicate. While generational research gives an indication of what groups might desire when it comes to customer experience, as we've said, building journeys based on this data alone will not provide the granularity required to craft deep connections with your prospective students. Therefore, it's vital to put into place an intelligent engagement platform that leverages the data and content that your organisation has gathered to provide a truly individualised experience for every student. You should not only rely on the data, but glean customer insight by engaging with your audience. As one CX expert advises, you should hang out with them, really get to know them, as only then will you be equipped with the insight and understanding you need to build a multi-generational experience that works. In summary, to deliver customer experience effectively, a deeper understanding of our audience is required. And to achieve this, a more intelligent approach is needed in the sector than the ones often demonstrated now. For example, a recent research piece led by Pickle Jar Communications found that prospective students feel that university comms are broadly impersonal, generic communications, not specific to their needs. They don't address their personal circumstances, their concerns, may not be relevant to their background, chosen course, or as I say, their personal situation. They are not tailored at all. As a sector, we must do better. Point 2 is that continual learning is a must. We need to remind ourselves that we are always learning about our customer base, and there will always be things we don't know that we don't know, and audience insight we are yet to learn. This furthers the case for a more sophisticated approach to designing and delivering your prospective student journeys. It's why you need to ensure that your teams are appropriately skilled and organised to use the data and customer insight to keep redesigning the journeys. You need to test and learn, iterate, test and learn again. It's a virtuous cycle. You also need to ensure that you have the right foundations in place, as we've heard earlier from Joel, both in terms of your people and your technology infrastructure, to enable you to undertake trends analysis, personalise and customise your journeys, enable you to glean ongoing insight and be able to analyse what's working and what isn't working to maximise your marketing strategies. More on this from Elliot later. So lastly from me then, number 3, what does all this mean for you and your organisation? We talk a lot about digital transformation, but every university will be at a different starting point. Is it truly transformation that's required, or are you already doing things well and ready for a continual improvement process layered onto a good foundation already in place? And by that we mean a robust technology infrastructure, intelligent engagement platform, effective ways of working, and a customer-centric approach to marketing and recruitment. Ask yourself, what data points are you already using to understand your prospective student journeys? Where are the gaps and the opportunities? Do you use a data-driven organisational model, for example? Even if it's currently fragmented, your organisation will have specific insight into your audience groups, the types of students you attract, and those you are successful at converting. But are you using this to full advantage to design your audience customer experience? Are you enabling a culture where your teams can use continual insight to test and learn, iterate, and deliver even better customer experiences? Are your journeys customised and personalised as well as they might be? Where are the current pain points in your prospective journeys, and what can you do to effect change? Do you and those responsible for the end-to-end journey work effectively enough from a cross-functional perspective to enable you to deliver a truly excellent customer experience? We appreciate that you are all facing a myriad of challenges right now, but as one senior leader recently noted to me, if anything, the pandemic has served to highlight the importance of a strategic capability in a complex environment. Connecting digitally with our audiences and digital agility has never been more valuable. So join us for future webinars and we will share what good CX looks like and provide practical solutions to help you to ensure your organisation is delivering against this. In the meantime, I'm now going to hand over to Elliot to cover the technology landscape. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathalie. So we've heard about the challenges the sector is facing and what's going through the minds of our prospective students. But how do we move towards a solution? And then crucially, what the specific role of technology is in solving these challenges? Our next two webinars will dive into these areas in more detail. But in the last few minutes today, we wanted to introduce some key drivers that we think the sector should be considering when making their technology investments. Platforms that underpin student recruitment processes should aim to deliver a fully personalised student recruitment journey, ensuring your target audience know that you understand them. Ultimately, this is how commercial organisations are engaging with our audiences, so why should their pricey education providers be any different? Ensure your content and your methods of contact are available on the channel of the prospective student's choice. And more importantly, make sure that you as the organisation behind those channels have full visibility of all of those channels in a way that is easy for you to manage and communicate with. Where things can be delivered via self-service platform, make sure they are. This allows your audience to be able to access most of your information and support instantly. Of course, this isn't always possible. But if you automate at every opportunity, instantaneous interactions become seamless. And as we learned from Nathalie, our audience are perfectly happy to communicate with a non-human agent to get answers quickly, just as they speak to Siri, Alexa, or Cortana every day. In our upcoming webinars, we will look at how Staffordshire University has done precisely this. Now, I appreciate all of this transformation appears daunting, but you should use your technology offering when recruiting, teaching, and supporting as your USP. For decades, swanky buildings have been front and centre of prospectuses and promotional materials. But in our new post-COVID world, this just can't be the case anymore. How is your digital experience differentiating you? And why should students choose to study with you on that basis? And this automated, personalised approach is not only beneficial for the stakeholders that you're engaging with, it can absolutely transform and provide benefit to your back office operations too. By embedding intelligence into your operational processes, you are in a much better place to manage and accurately predict areas such as student numbers. Granted, it's in a slightly different world, but at Microsoft, we moved to humanless AI-driven revenue forecasting 3 years ago. And the AI forecast beat human forecasting in 13 out of 14 of those quarters, enabling us to accurately plan our business. And there is no reason why universities can't do the same with student recruitment. We will dive into all of these areas in more detail in our next two webinars, and we hope that you're able to join us. On Thursday, the 6th of August, we'll be looking at the quick wins that you can make with the ambition of realising value immediately. On Thursday, the 27th of August, we'll look at how you can learn from these quick wins to play the slightly longer game, and we'll be featuring case studies from UK and international institutions. Head to the links on the screen to book your place if you haven't already. The recording of today's webinar will be available on SUM's website, and you'll each receive an email with suggested further reading and a short feedback survey. We really appreciate your thoughts on how today's session was for you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to Joel and to Nathalie for your insight and expertise. We look forward to seeing you next time.